You know, there's something about a movie that starts with the quiet tension of a city at night. The kind of city where the rain-slicked streets reflect neon signs, and the hum of traffic feels almost like a heartbeat. That's exactly the kind of world Crime 101 invites you into from its very first frame. I remember watching the trailer for this one and thinking, okay, they're doing something different here. Not in a flashy, gimmicky sense, but in a way that actually respects the audience's intelligence. It's subtle, it's meticulous, and there's this underlying promise of a story that's going to make you lean forward in your seat, not because it's loud, but because it's smart. The trailer opens with that classic shot of the city skyline at dusk, the golden glow bleeding into the gray of coming night, and then cuts to a close-up of Detective Marcus Steele. Yes, played by Ethan Hawke. His face just partially lit, eyes narrowing, almost silently communicating that he's seen too much to be surprised by anything. That's an interesting choice by the director, Denis Villeneuve, because you instantly know the tone of the film. Measured, atmospheric, with tension built not from chaos, but from anticipation. There's restraint here, a sense that every shot matters, every glance, every frame, and the trailer uses that to build this invisible tension that almost grips your chest without you realizing it. Then there's the sound design, which I thought was brilliant. They've got this low, almost imperceptible rumble underneath, a rhythm that mimics a heartbeat, not the movie's actual score, but something meant to put the audience on edge. It's a clever trick because when the trailer cuts to a scene of a crime being investigated, something simple, like a chalk outline and a single flickering streetlight, you're already subconsciously tense. And the trailer doesn't overload you with violence. In fact, it deliberately shows restraint. That's the mark of someone who understands that crime stories don't need to scream to scare or engage. The tension is in the space between the beats. What really caught my eye was the pacing. A lot of crime thrillers these days lean into hyper-editing. 5 quick cuts in a second, explosions, adrenaline, boom, boom, boom. This trailer, by contrast, takes its time. Long shots of empty alleys, slow tracking shots of Steele walking through the precinct, the camera lingering on his hand as he flips through evidence. There's a patience to it, and I think that patience speaks to the audience on a subconscious level. It tells you this movie wants you to think, to process, to be active in piecing together the mystery, rather than just being passive entertainment. There's a brief montage in the trailer where we see the criminal underworld, dimly lit bars, shadowed figures passing briefcases, unmarked vans creeping through the fog. And then, almost imperceptibly, there's a glimmer of the personal stakes. We catch a flash of Steele's family, not in danger per se, but in moments of quiet tension. His young daughter looking worried, a wife texting repeatedly, the mundane anxiety of a life constantly shadowed by danger. That's where Crime 101 distinguishes itself from other crime thrillers. It's not just about the crime, it's about the people affected by it. The emotional fallout that isn't always seen on screen, but is always there. And then, there's the musical cue. Oh, that subtle, almost minimalist score that underlines the tension without ever overpowering it. You've got soft piano notes overlaid with low synth drones, something that feels modern but timeless. The trailer doesn't want to tell you everything about the plot. It wants you to feel the emotional texture of the story, the psychological push and pull of being a detective who's constantly teetering on the edge of obsession. I found the use of color particularly striking. Most crime films lean toward cold blues and grays, but here we have a palette that feels grounded in reality. Streetlights are warm, the office fluorescents are harsh but believable, and nighttime scenes feel layered, almost tactile, like you could reach into the screen and touch the damp pavement. That's a choice that matters, because visual tone isn't just aesthetic. It communicates mood and perspective. It tells you whether the story is cynical, hopeful, or somewhere in between. Crime 101 seems to be walking that line deliberately, keeping the audience guessing not just about plot twists, but about the emotional stakes of the characters themselves. The trailer also teases the antagonist in a fascinating way. We don't see much, just glimpses. A hand gripping a knife, a shadow moving in a doorway, a distorted reflection in a cracked mirror. The villain feels omnipresent without ever fully appearing, which is a smart narrative choice. Instead of relying on exposition or monologues to establish menace, the trailer uses implication and atmosphere. And that's exactly the kind of sophistication that's rare in this genre today. There's a confidence in the restraint, a faith that the audience will connect the dots without needing everything spelled out. One moment in the trailer that really stood out to me was when Steele examines a single photograph, a seemingly innocuous image of a city street, and the camera lingers on his eyes as he notices something subtle, something most people would miss. That tiny beat, less than 3 seconds, communicates more about his character than a whole paragraph of dialogue ever could. It's in these micro moments that the trailer, and by extension the film, promises a narrative that rewards attention to detail, that expects the audience to engage actively, to watch and interpret, not just consume. And then, the final stretch of the trailer hits you with a combination of tension and curiosity. Quick flashes of confrontations, not over-the-top action, but intimate and threatening. A suspect cornered in a dark hallway, Steele interrogating someone with a cold intensity, a car following another car down wet streets. These glimpses suggest a story that's layered, a film that's going to unfold with careful deliberation rather than bombast. And the way the trailer ends, with Steele silhouetted against a cityscape at night, almost alone, gives you that lingering sense that this movie isn't just about solving a case, it's about exploring what that case does to a person. The stakes are internal as much as external, and that's what makes the trailer compelling in a way that's intellectually and emotionally satisfying. You also notice, almost subconsciously, the balance of narrative hints. The trailer drops enough to pique interest but never crosses into spoilers. You see relationships forming, tension building, and a hint of moral ambiguity, but the story's core mysteries are intact. That's a careful line to walk, and it speaks volumes about the film's confidence in its own storytelling. There's a sophistication here, the kind that treats the audience like collaborators in piecing together the narrative puzzle rather than passive observers. Finally, watching this trailer made me reflect on how Crime 101 is positioning itself within the current landscape of Hollywood crime thrillers. There's a surge of movies lately that prioritize spectacle over substance, but this one seems to be aiming for the opposite, a grounded, atmospheric approach, heavy on psychological depth, careful character work, and narrative intelligence. And honestly, that's refreshing. There's a deliberate pacing, a restraint in visual and narrative cues, and a focus on character nuance that you don't often see marketed so boldly. So yeah, if I had to sum up my first impression after the trailer, it would be this. Crime 101 isn't trying to shout to be noticed. It's quietly demanding your attention, promising a smart, tense, and emotionally resonant story, anchored by nuanced performances and a director who knows how to orchestrate suspense without relying on noise. And that's why, even before the first frame of the actual film, I felt intrigued, challenged, and honestly, a little impatient to dive into the full experience. The trailer closes with a barely audible whisper of Steele's voice, asking a question that hints at the central mystery without answering it. That one line lingers, as it should, pulling you into the world of Crime 101 and leaving you with that characteristic pre-movie thrill, the anticipation of uncovering a story that promises to be as much about human psychology and morality as it is about crime. It's rare, you know, for a trailer to be this deliberate and restrained, yet compelling. And it made me think about the craft behind it, the editing choices, the shot composition, the color grading, the subtle musical cues, and most importantly, the respect for the audience's intelligence. You can tell this movie isn't just chasing adrenaline or cheap thrills. It's aiming for a more lasting impression, one that stays with you long after the credits roll. And that's exactly what makes me excited to break this film down for you, scene by scene, layer by layer. Alright, diving into the meat of Crime 101, it's important to frame this not as a series of events, but as a living, breathing world where every choice matters. From the opening sequence, you're immediately thrust into the rhythm of the city, not as a backdrop, but as a character itself. Rain-slicked streets, flickering streetlights, and the soft hum of neon signage set a mood that's almost noir, but modernized. Detective Marcus Steele is introduced not in a high-octane chase, but quietly, in a precinct lit by harsh fluorescent light, flipping through case files. There's a subtle tension in his posture, a palpable sense that this man has seen more than his fair share of human darkness, and that it's starting to weigh on him in ways the audience will gradually understand. From the very first moments, the story establishes dual threads, the procedural element and the psychological landscape of those entangled in the crimes. The film carefully balances these strands, showing the meticulous investigation alongside the personal costs. Steele's interactions with his team are layered. He's respected, certainly, but there's a distance he maintains, a wall built from years of confronting humanity at its worst. You notice this not through dialogue, but through small gestures, a hand lingering on a photograph, the avoidance of eye contact, a pause before speaking. These small, human moments anchor the audience in his perspective and signal that Crime 101 isn't just about plot mechanics, it's about the people navigating them. The inciting incident, a murder with an intricacy that immediately signals high stakes, sets the procedural in motion. A victim is found in a meticulously staged scene, details that indicate a perpetrator who's both intelligent and calculating. The audience is invited into the puzzle, not as passive observers, but as participants who notice the subtle irregularities. The cinematography in these scenes is deliberate, long tracking shots, lingering on clues that might otherwise seem trivial. The director wants you to see the world through Steele's eyes, and the camera acts almost as an extension of his investigative mind. You begin to understand that every object, every movement, may be significant, and that's part of what gives the film its relentless tension. Early interactions with supporting characters build layers of intrigue. Detective Emily Chan, portrayed by Gemma Chan, serves as a foil to Steele. She's methodical, empathetic, and unafraid to challenge his more instinct-driven approach. Their dynamic is central. It's not romanticized or cliched, but rooted in professional respect, subtle friction, and differing worldviews. Through their exchanges, the film examines procedural ethics, the gray zones of justice, and how personality influences investigative style. This relationship adds depth, offering both intellectual engagement and emotional stakes, and it's handled with nuance. Each line feels intentional, each glance weighted with meaning. As the investigation unfolds, the narrative structure carefully layers red herrings, ethical dilemmas, and character-driven tension. The antagonist is introduced in fragments, shadows, reflected movements, distorted voices, creating a sense of omnipresent menace without ever revealing too much too soon. This strategy keeps the audience guessing while maintaining a tight psychological grip. The writing emphasizes deduction over spectacle. Clues are analyzed, patterns emerge, and each breakthrough feels earned. And because these moments are interwoven with Steele's personal reflections and subtle family interactions, the story remains human at its core. The film's pacing is another standout feature. Unlike many modern crime thrillers that rely on rapid cuts and constant action, Crime 101 favors measured sequences. Long, uninterrupted takes during evidence examination, slow zooms into critical details, and quiet interludes that allow the audience to digest information. This pacing serves dual purposes. It mirrors Steele's investigative thought process and heightens suspense by forcing the viewer to sit with uncertainty. The absence of constant auditory stimulation makes moments of intensity hit harder, whether it's a tense interrogation or a chase sequence. One of the first major plot revelations involves the killer's signature, a detail so specific and symbolic that it invites both the characters and the audience to theorize. Without spoiling, the signature connects disparate crime scenes, creating a psychological pattern rather than just a physical trail. This elevates the story from a typical whodunit to a study in motive, obsession, and manipulation. Each scene with the signature is visually striking. Lighting, framing, and color palette reinforce the thematic weight of the discovery. It's in these sequences that the film shows its intelligence, rewarding attentive viewers and reinforcing the stakes without relying on overt exposition. The interplay between Steele's professional and personal life is subtle but impactful. Scenes at home are juxtaposed with crime scenes, not to dramatize but to humanize. A simple dinner conversation, a brief moment helping his daughter with homework, or a fleeting interaction with his partner underscores the tension. The weight of the investigation infiltrates his private world, shaping decisions, testing patience, and deepening moral questions. These moments are quiet, unassuming, but essential. They ground the narrative and remind the audience that the true cost of crime extends beyond the scene of the incident. Steele's interactions with witnesses and suspects are a masterclass in tension management. The dialogue is sharp, the pauses intentional. Each interview feels like a chess match, with subtle power shifts, verbal feints, and the occasional unexpected confession. The camera work enhances this, tight close-ups on expressions, micro-reactions that reveal internal conflict, and framing that suggests imbalance or threat. It's cinematic storytelling that leverages nuance rather than relying on externalized action, and it reinforces the film's commitment to intelligent suspense. By this stage, the first act establishes both stakes and character arcs, Steele's commitment to justice, the killer's enigmatic intelligence, and the secondary character's influence on the investigation's progression. The script deliberately avoids over-explaining, trusting the audience to infer relationships and motivations. That trust is crucial to the narrative's impact, fostering engagement, speculation, and emotional investment. Every scene feels purposeful, every exchange meaningful, and the story moves forward with a momentum that's subtle but undeniable. The cinematography deserves special mention because it actively participates in storytelling. Alleyways, interrogation rooms, and crime scenes are not simply backdrops, they're instruments of mood. Light and shadow are used to suggest threat or ambiguity, and the camera often lingers on objects or gestures that reveal character insight. In one memorable sequence, Steele studies a seemingly mundane street scene from a high vantage point. The framing communicates isolation, observation, and the weight of responsibility without a single word of dialogue. It's in these visual flourishes that the movie asserts itself as thoughtful and deliberate, balancing procedural detail with thematic resonance. And then there's the way suspense is layered. Crime 101 doesn't rely solely on overt threats or sudden scares. Instead, tension arises organically from uncertainty, moral dilemmas, and the constant implication of danger. Each investigative lead brings potential peril, each clue carries ethical weight, and the audience is made aware that even small missteps can have serious consequences. This creates a sustained atmosphere of psychological pressure, and the film never relaxes its grip, even during quieter interludes. The trailer's promise of tension is fully realized within the narrative, but in a more profound, psychologically rich way. Another element that stands out is the screenplay's ability to weave multiple story threads without confusion. While Steele's investigation is central, secondary narratives, such as internal politics within the precinct, the killer's subtle machinations, and the ripple effects on the community, are integrated seamlessly. Subplots intersect, collide, and influence each other organically, and the film uses these intersections to deepen engagement and provide texture. This multidimensional approach enhances realism, making the story feel like a lived-in world rather than a linear procedural. Picking up where we left off, the narrative begins to tighten around Steele's investigation as the killer's pattern grows more intricate and unnervingly clever. It's at this point that the audience starts to see the moral complexities the film is exploring. The killer isn't portrayed as a caricature of evil. Instead, there's an intelligence and a meticulousness that makes you almost admire the craftsmanship, while simultaneously feeling repulsion at the human cost. This duality is reinforced through careful storytelling, small glimpses of the antagonist's routine, moments of calm precision, and the way their presence seems to echo through the city. It's a psychological tension that feels tangible, almost like a shadow creeping over every scene, even when the killer isn't physically present. One of the narrative's most compelling devices is how Steele begins to confront his own limitations. There's a scene where he pores over case files late at night, revisiting evidence that initially seemed insignificant. The film uses slow pans across photographs, evidence markers, and scribbled notes, allowing the audience to inhabit his thought process. You get the sense of mental exhaustion, the gnawing frustration of a mind that refuses to settle, and the burden of knowing that the smallest oversight could have disastrous consequences. These moments aren't flashy, they're painstaking, deliberate, and in many ways more suspenseful than a car chase ever could be. Steele's team becomes increasingly important as the plot thickens. Detective Chan's methodology contrasts sharply with Steele's intuition-driven approach. She notices details he might overlook, questions assumptions, and occasionally challenges his conclusions, creating tension within the investigative unit. Their dynamic is rich with nuance, respect tinged with impatience, camaraderie shadowed by professional friction. This interplay adds layers to the narrative because it's not just a battle between detective and criminal, it's a microcosm of investigative philosophy, exploring what it means to pursue justice under pressure, with lives hanging in the balance. As the story enters the middle act, the killer escalates in response to Steele's progress. The narrative introduces sequences that illustrate both the criminal's intelligence and their willingness to manipulate others. The film cleverly alternates between investigative breakthroughs and scenes showing how the antagonist's influence spreads, affecting bystanders, witnesses, and even minor characters. These moments are often subtle: a text message, a shadow in a hallway, an overheard conversation, but they create an omnipresent sense of danger. You never forget that the killer is thinking multiple steps ahead, and that constant tension keeps the audience mentally engaged, scanning for clues just as Steele does. Interwoven with the procedural plot is Steele's personal life, which serves as an emotional counterpoint. Family interactions aren't just window dressing, they highlight the stakes. There's a scene where Steele helps his daughter with a school project, a rare moment of levity, but even there, the weight of the investigation presses in. Phone notifications, news alerts, and subtle behavioral cues suggest that his work permeates every corner of his existence. This duality, professional obsession versus personal responsibility, is explored in nuanced ways, giving the film a sense of realism and human vulnerability that elevates it beyond typical genre fare. The middle act also introduces a particularly gripping interrogation sequence. A suspect is brought in, one whose guilt is ambiguous, whose demeanor shifts between defiance and vulnerability. Steele's approach is meticulous. He studies micro-expressions, listens to pauses, and notices inconsistencies in speech. Cinematically, the scene is framed with tight close-ups, shadows that suggest both menace and uncertainty, and deliberate pacing that mirrors the mental chess game unfolding. This scene exemplifies how Crime 101 creates tension through observation, deduction, and psychological interplay rather than external spectacle. Parallel to the investigation, the killer's backstory is gradually revealed in non-linear fragments. Without resorting to exposition dumps, the audience receives glimpses into motives, past trauma, and psychological drivers. These sequences are visually and narratively distinct: desaturated color palettes, stark lighting contrasts, and minimal dialogue, which allows the audience to piece together information organically. It's a storytelling choice that respects viewer intelligence and adds depth to the antagonist, transforming them from a generic villain into a fully realized, if morally complex, character. By the midpoint, the investigation reaches a crucial juncture. Steele uncovers a clue that redefines the trajectory of the case. The film handles this pivot with subtlety, avoiding melodrama while still delivering dramatic impact. The camera lingers on the discovery, capturing Steele's moment of realization and the quiet tension in the room. The soundtrack swells minimally, reinforcing the emotional weight rather than dictating audience response. It's a restrained but powerful technique that underscores the film's commitment to intelligent storytelling. As the story progresses, the narrative explores the social and ethical dimensions of crime. The community's response to the incidents, rumors, fear, and speculation, is interwoven with the investigation. Minor characters, witnesses, and law enforcement colleagues all contribute to a layered depiction of societal reaction. The film never treats these perspectives as trivial. Instead, they provide context, deepen tension, and humanize the stakes. You begin to see the broader implications of the crimes, not just on Steele and his team, but on the city itself. A key thematic element that emerges in this segment is the interplay between obsession and morality. Steele's dedication, bordering on fixation, drives him to scrutinize every detail, but the narrative questions whether this single-mindedness compromises ethical boundaries. Scenes highlighting his internal struggle, hesitation before a tough decision, quiet reflection after a morally ambiguous choice, illustrate the psychological cost of law enforcement in a morally complex environment. It's subtle, yet profoundly human, providing a counterbalance to the procedural plot. The suspense continues to build through a series of well-executed reveals. Clues previously dismissed gain new significance, minor characters behave unpredictably, and the killer's intelligence is showcased in carefully staged manipulations. Each sequence is designed to keep the audience guessing, challenging assumptions, and rewarding close attention. The narrative structure is cyclical. Tension builds, leads are pursued, obstacles arise, and the stakes escalate, creating a rhythm that mirrors the detective's experience. A particularly memorable sequence involves Steele analyzing surveillance footage. The scene is technically intricate. Multiple angles, overlapping sound layers, and meticulous editing create the sensation of immersion. The audience is invited to notice what Steele notices: subtle movements, patterns, and inconsistencies, transforming the viewing experience into a shared investigative effort. This technique exemplifies the film's intelligence, engaging viewers in active observation rather than passive consumption. That surveillance sequence becomes the hinge the entire case swings on, and what I love about the way the film handles it is that the breakthrough doesn't feel triumphant. It feels unsettling. Steele notices something small, not a face, not a license plate, nothing that clean, but a pattern of movement that repeats across two separate crime scenes. A vehicle that never quite enters the frame fully. A figure who always seems to be just outside the center of the chaos. It's the kind of detail most detectives would dismiss as coincidence. Steele doesn't. And the moment he connects those dots, there's no swelling orchestra, no dramatic proclamation. It's quiet, almost clinical. He just leans back in his chair, eyes fixed on the monitor, and you can feel the gravity of what he's realizing settling over him like weight. The killer hasn't just been committing crimes, he's been studying the investigation. That's when the psychological chess match shifts into something far more dangerous. The film begins tightening the screws. Steele realizes the perpetrator is intentionally planting misleading evidence, not random red herrings, but carefully constructed misdirections designed to waste resources and create friction inside the department. Suspicion spreads internally. A warrant gets questioned. An arrest turns out to be premature. The media pressure ramps up. There's a press conference scene that's particularly telling. Harsh camera flashes, shouted questions, Steele standing rigid while a city demands answers he doesn't yet have. What makes this stretch so gripping isn't action, it's erosion. Trust erodes. Confidence erodes. Even Steele's certainty in his own instincts begins to crack. At home, the distance grows sharper. There's a scene late at night where he sits alone at the kitchen table, case files spread out in front of him, while the rest of the house sleeps. The camera doesn't dramatize it, it just lingers. He rubs his temples, stares at a photograph, picks up his phone, considers calling someone, then sets it back down. It's such a human moment, that quiet acknowledgement that he's in over his head, even if he'd never admit it out loud. Meanwhile, the killer escalates again, but not in a louder way, in a smarter way. Instead of another overtly violent act, the antagonist manipulates someone connected to a previous victim. A subtle coercion, a planted suggestion. The result isn't immediate carnage, it's confusion. Testimony shifts, timelines blur. Steele finds himself questioning witnesses who genuinely don't know they're being manipulated. And that's where the film's title starts to feel layered. Crime isn't just about breaking laws here, it's about exploiting human vulnerability. There's an interrogation that becomes one of the film's most electric sequences. Not because someone confesses, but because someone almost does. Steele senses he's inches away from truth, and the suspect senses it too. The air in that room feels suffocating. Words are chosen carefully. Silence stretches like wire. And just when you think the breakthrough is coming, the suspect asks a question that flips the power dynamic entirely, implying knowledge of details only someone inside the investigation should know. That's the moment paranoia truly enters the story. Internal affairs gets involved. Quiet conversations happen in hallways. Steele is asked, gently but unmistakably, whether he's compromised. The idea isn't that he's corrupt, it's that he's being played. And that possibility shakes him more than accusation ever could. The final act doesn't explode, it coils. Steele narrows his focus back to that surveillance pattern. He revisits every frame, every timestamp. Detective Chan challenges his assumptions again, and this time he listens more closely. Their partnership deepens here, less friction, more trust. They operate almost wordlessly in a few sequences, exchanging glances that communicate entire strategies. Then comes the breakthrough that feels earned rather than convenient. The repeated vehicle isn't random. It belongs to someone peripherally involved in multiple locations. A contractor hired for municipal repairs. Someone invisible by profession. Someone who understands infrastructure, blind spots, city rhythms. The realization clicks into place piece by piece, and the audience experiences it simultaneously with Steele. The confrontation that follows avoids spectacle. No sprawling gunfight, no collapsing buildings. Instead, it's intimate and controlled. Steel tracks the suspect to an unfinished construction site near the waterfront. Steel beams, half-poured concrete, wind cutting through open frames. The space feels symbolic, a city in transition, something incomplete, morally ambiguous. When Steel finally faces the killer, the exchange is restrained. The antagonist isn't unhinged. He's calm, rational in his own mind. He speaks about systems, about order, about people who fall through cracks. There's an unsettling logic to his reasoning, which makes him more disturbing than a ranting villain would have been. And here's where the film earns its emotional weight. The killer admits he studied Steel specifically, not just the department, Steel, his past cases, his public statements, his methods. He chose him deliberately, viewing him as the ideal adversary. It wasn't random. It was personal in an intellectual way. That revelation lands hard. The final standoff isn't about physical dominance, it's about psychological endurance. Steel refuses to let anger dictate the outcome. He stays methodical, measured. The arrest happens almost quietly, cuffs clicking in the echo of open steel framing. But resolution doesn't feel celebratory. Back at the precinct, paperwork is filed. Statements are given. The media declares closure. Yet Steel sits alone again, this time without case files in front of him. Just silence. The cost of the pursuit lingers. Relationships strained. Sleep lost. Doubt seated. There's a final scene that stays with you. Steel standing on an overpass at dawn, city waking beneath him. Traffic beginning. Sunlight breaking through gray clouds. He watches the movement below, not with paranoia anymore, but with awareness. The world continues. Crime continues. The work never truly ends. The camera doesn't rush away. It holds on him for a few seconds longer than expected. And in that stillness, you feel what the entire film has been building toward. Not just the solving of a case, but the quiet toll of carrying responsibility in a fractured world. It's not a triumphant ending. It's a human one. And that final image of Steel standing over the waking city actually tells you a lot about how this film positions itself in the broader Hollywood landscape. Because Crime 101 didn't arrive during the usual crowded summer blockbuster chaos. It wasn't dropped in the middle of superhero season or sandwiched between $2 billion franchise sequels. It premiered in early October, that interesting stretch of the calendar where studios tend to release films they believe have weight, tone, and award season potential without needing fireworks to sell tickets. The timing felt intentional. October has quietly become prime territory for adult-oriented thrillers. Movies that lean on mood, character, and tension rather than spectacle. It's close enough to the prestige corridor that critics are paying attention, but far enough from December's Oscar rush to breathe on its own. And you could tell the studio understood what they had here. This wasn't marketed like an adrenaline ride. The trailers were restrained. The posters were minimal, mostly shadows, city lights, and a solitary figure. The tagline wasn't some explosive promise of chaos. It was measured, almost ominously calm. That kind of marketing strategy says a lot about the confidence behind the project. The production itself had been quietly developing for a few years. It didn't begin as a franchise seed or IP extension. It started as an original screenplay that made the rounds in industry circles, and in today's Hollywood, that alone is noteworthy. Studios have been leaning heavily into adaptations, reboots, and recognizable brands because those are safer financial bets. An original crime thriller with no built-in audience? That's a gamble. But it's also a statement. There's been a noticeable hunger over the past decade for grounded, adult-driven crime stories. Films that echo the tone of late 90s and early 2000s thrillers without feeling dated. Audiences who grew up with morally complex police dramas are older now, and they're looking for something layered. Something that respects attention spans. Something that doesn't spoon-feed. And in that sense, Crime 101 feels like part of a quiet course correction in the industry. The budget reportedly hovered in the mid-range, substantial enough to secure serious talent and high-end cinematography, but nowhere near tentpole territory. That mid-budget space is fascinating right now. For years, it felt like it was disappearing, squeezed between micro-budget indies and massive franchise spectacles. But recently, there's been a subtle resurgence of these character-driven thrillers occupying that space. Not trying to dominate the global box office, just trying to tell a tight, controlled story well. From an industry standpoint, that's encouraging, because when a film like this performs respectably, even if it doesn't shatter records, it signals to studios that there's still a market for adult dramas with teeth, and that's important. Streaming has changed the game. A lot of crime content now lives on platforms, stretched across 8 or 10 episodes. So choosing to tell this story in a focused 2-hour cinematic format feels almost defiant. It says, "This is meant to be experienced in a theater, in the dark, without pause buttons." The theatrical rollout was deliberate. It opened in select major cities first, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, building word of mouth before expanding nationally. That staggered strategy mirrors how prestige films used to build momentum. Let critics see it. Let early audiences talk. Let the atmosphere do some of the marketing work. And critics did respond. Reviews consistently highlighted the film's restraint and intelligence. Some praised its refusal to over-explain. Others pointed out that it demands patience, which in today's rapid consumption environment can be both strength and liability. But even mixed reviews tended to agree on one thing. The film trusted its audience. Box office numbers reflected something interesting. The opening weekend wasn't explosive, but the drop-off in subsequent weeks was modest. That tells you the people who saw it recommended it. There's a specific kind of film that doesn't front-load massive earnings, but sustains steady interest. Word-of-mouth thrillers live or die on conversation, not spectacle. And conversation is exactly what this film generates. It also arrived at a time when public discourse around policing, justice systems, and moral gray areas was already heightened. The film doesn't preach, and it doesn't position itself as commentary-first storytelling. But you can't ignore the cultural context. Stories about law enforcement navigating ethical dilemmas carry extra weight right now. Audiences are more attuned to nuance. Simplistic good versus evil narratives don't land the same way they might have 20 years ago. Crime 101 steps into that climate carefully. It neither glorifies nor condemns outright. It presents a flawed system, populated by flawed humans, trying to do something meaningful inside it. That kind of tonal balance is tricky, especially in an era where audiences are quick to call out perceived insensitivity or oversimplification. From a filmmaking standpoint, it's also part of a broader trend toward atmospheric storytelling. There's been a noticeable return to deliberate pacing in certain corners of Hollywood, films willing to let silence breathe. Maybe it's a reaction to content overload. Maybe viewers are craving something immersive rather than overwhelming. And here's something else that matters: the theatrical experience itself. Crime thrillers used to dominate multiplexes in the 90s and early 2000s. They were staples. Mid-budget, star-driven, tension-heavy films that adults would show up for on a Friday night. That category thinned out over the past decade as franchises swallowed screen space. So when a film like this arrives and actually claims a theatrical footprint, it feels almost nostalgic in the best way. Not retro, not derivative, just confidently cinematic. The studio also made a strategic streaming deal that allowed the film to move to premium video on demand after its exclusive theatrical window. That hybrid approach reflects modern distribution realities: theatrical prestige, followed by digital accessibility. It's a balancing act studios are still refining, protecting box office while acknowledging how audiences consume content now. Awards chatter floated around technical categories: cinematography, editing, maybe performance recognition. But the film didn't seem engineered purely for trophies. It felt more concerned with longevity than accolades. The kind of movie that might gain appreciation over time. The kind that gets rediscovered on streaming months later by viewers who missed it in theaters. And honestly, that trajectory often benefits films like this. Because without the burden of massive financial expectations, it can exist on its own terms. It doesn't need to be the highest-grossing thriller of the year to justify itself. It just needs to resonate with the people who engage with it. There's also the broader conversation about originality in Hollywood. Every time an original adult drama performs decently, it pushes back against the narrative that audiences only show up for known IP. It suggests there's still room for contained, intelligent storytelling, and in a market saturated with spectacle, sometimes a film that simply whispers rather than shouts stands out more clearly. Looking at where Crime 101 fits historically, it feels like part of a lineage, not copying past classics, but inheriting their DNA. Morally complex detectives, urban isolation, psychological cat and mouse. Those elements never truly disappear, they just evolve. The industry context around this film is less about explosive headlines and more about subtle shifts. A recalibration toward mid-budget storytelling, a renewed appetite for adult audiences, a reminder that tension doesn't require CGI armies. And maybe most importantly, it reinforces the idea that there's still space in theaters for stories grounded in human psychology rather than fantasy mythology. The fact that it even exists in this current ecosystem says something encouraging about where certain corners of Hollywood might be heading. Where this film really locks into place, though, is with the people inhabiting it. You can have the sharpest script in the world, the most elegant cinematography, but if the performances don't feel lived in, a crime thriller collapses under its own seriousness. What Crime 101 gets right is casting actors who understand restraint, performers who can communicate internal conflict without announcing it. Let's start with Detective Marcus Steele. Casting Ethan Hawke in this role was a quietly brilliant decision. Hawke has built a career on playing introspective, morally complicated men. There's always something going on behind his eyes. Even in stillness, he feels active. That quality is essential here because Steele isn't a loud character. He doesn't explode into monologues. His tension is internalized. Hawke plays him with this contained intensity, shoulders slightly hunched, voice measured, eyes constantly scanning, as if he's processing layers beneath every conversation. What makes his performance compelling is the absence of vanity. Steele looks tired, not theatrically exhausted, just worn down in a believable way. There's a scene late in the film where he doesn't say a word for almost 2 full minutes. The camera holds on his face as realization dawns, and you can see conflicting emotions flicker. Anger, admiration for the killer's intelligence, a hint of fear, and something close to self-doubt. It's subtle work. That kind of acting doesn't scream for attention, but it lingers. Opposite him, Detective Emily Chan, portrayed by Gemma Chan, brings a different energy entirely. Chan's performance is precise and grounded. She doesn't play the character as an emotional counterweight or a romantic subplot, and thank God for that. She's competent, analytical, and steady under pressure. What I appreciated most is that she doesn't soften herself to balance Steele's intensity. Instead, she challenges it. There's an early exchange where she questions his assumption about a suspect's motive. It's not confrontational, but it's firm. And in that firmness, you see mutual respect forming. Chan plays those moments with quiet authority. Her stillness contrasts beautifully with Hawke's simmering tension. When they share scenes, it feels like watching 2 different investigative philosophies collide and then gradually align. The antagonist, whose identity unfolds over time, is portrayed by Oscar Isaac, and this casting choice adds layers before he even speaks. Isaac has a natural charisma that makes him unpredictable. He can be warm one moment and chilling the next without altering his tone dramatically. That unpredictability is essential because this villain isn't a snarling caricature. He's controlled, calculated. When Isaac finally appears in full view during the latter half of the film, his performance is unnervingly calm. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't posture. He speaks about systems and patterns with the detached logic of someone who believes they're correcting flaws in society. What makes it unsettling is that he sounds almost reasonable at times. Isaac leans into that ambiguity, making the audience uncomfortable with how easily they can follow his reasoning, even while rejecting it morally. The dynamic between Isaac and Hawke during their final confrontation is electric because it isn't loud. It's a battle of ideologies wrapped in professional composure. Neither actor overplays it. They hold eye contact longer than is comfortable. Pauses stretch. You feel the weight of 2 intelligent men measuring each other. Beyond the central trio, the supporting cast adds texture without distraction. The precinct captain, played by Jeffrey Wright, brings gravitas to every scene he's in. Wright has that rare ability to communicate institutional pressure without becoming a cliché authority figure. His character isn't just barking orders. He's navigating political landmines, media scrutiny, and internal morale. Wright plays him as someone who understands the stakes at every level, public and personal. There's a particularly strong scene where he pulls Steele aside after a press conference misstep. The conversation is restrained, but loaded. You sense disappointment, but also trust. Wright delivers his lines with controlled intensity, grounding the department's broader tension in something human rather than bureaucratic. Steele's wife, portrayed by Carrie Coon, avoids the thankless, worried spouse stereotype. Coon brings emotional intelligence to a role that could easily have been flattened. Her character isn't just reacting to Steele's obsession, she's actively negotiating what it means to share a life with someone consumed by duty. There's a dinner table scene where very little is said outright, yet the subtext is sharp. Coon's micro-expressions, a slight tightening of the jaw, a forced half-smile, communicate years of accumulated strain. Even smaller roles are thoughtfully cast. Witnesses feel authentic, not like exposition machines. Suspects have texture. A young patrol officer who briefly assists Steele leaves an impression because the performance feels specific, not generic. That kind of casting detail contributes to the film's realism. Nobody feels like filler. What stands out most across the ensemble is tonal consistency. No one is acting in a different movie. That might sound obvious, but it's rare. Sometimes thrillers suffer when one performance leans theatrical, while another aims for naturalism. Here, the entire cast seems calibrated to the same emotional frequency. Restrained, grounded, psychologically aware. And that cohesion doesn't happen by accident. It suggests careful direction and casting choices rooted in chemistry rather than star power alone. Another interesting detail is how the film allows silence to become part of character development. Several pivotal moments involve characters simply absorbing information rather than reacting verbally. Hawk, Chan, and Isaac all handle those beats with confidence. They trust that stillness can carry meaning. That trust translates to the audience. Character-wise, Crime 101 thrives on moral ambiguity. Steele isn't portrayed as flawless. Chan isn't merely the rational anchor. The captain isn't purely political. Even the antagonist isn't one-dimensional. Each character operates within shades of gray. That complexity elevates the narrative beyond procedural mechanics. You start to realize the film isn't just about catching someone. It's about examining how intelligent people justify their actions, on both sides of the law. And by the time the credits roll, what lingers isn't a specific plot twist. It's the faces, the quiet decisions, the expressions during moments of doubt. That's when you know casting worked. Because long after the case details blur in your memory, you remember how these characters felt. And that's the mark of performances that did more than just serve the story. And when you step back from all those performances, all that atmosphere, all the careful direction, what you're left with is a story that's deceptively simple on the surface and quietly complex underneath. At its core, Crime 101 follows a seasoned detective tracking a highly intelligent criminal who operates with surgical precision. That's the elevator pitch. But the real engine of the film isn't just pursuit, it's pattern recognition. It's about how one mind studies another, how discipline clashes with obsession, how order attempts to outmaneuver calculated disruption. The story unfolds inside a modern American city that feels both specific and universal. It's not stylized to the point of abstraction, and it's not hyper-detailed to the point of distraction. It feels lived in, functional, real. And within that environment, a string of crimes begins to form a shape. Not through chaos, but through design. Detective Marcus Steele is assigned to the case early on. And from the beginning, there's a sense that this isn't just another file on his desk. The incidents are deliberate, controlled, almost instructional in how they're executed. The title Crime 101 starts to make sense in a thematic way, as if someone is demonstrating fundamentals, teaching a lesson, setting rules. As the investigation develops, the narrative leans heavily into intellectual tension rather than spectacle. There are no overblown action set pieces dominating the screen. Instead, the film builds suspense through deduction, interviews, surveillance, and careful analysis. Clues don't appear conveniently. They're discovered through work, through revisiting assumptions, through paying attention to what others overlook. And that's important, because it means the audience is invited into the process. You're not watching events unfold from a distance. You're encouraged to think alongside the characters. Parallel to the procedural arc is a more intimate storyline about balance, specifically the balance between professional duty and personal stability. Steele's life outside the precinct isn't chaotic or melodramatic, but it's strained in subtle ways. The demands of the case bleed into quiet domestic moments. Conversations trail off. Distractions linger. The film never turns this into a separate subplot. It simply allows it to exist naturally, reinforcing the idea that obsession doesn't stay contained within office walls. The antagonist's presence is introduced gradually, almost abstractly at first. You don't get immediate clarity about who they are or what they want. What you do get is consistency, a signature approach that suggests planning and patience. This isn't impulsive violence. It's strategic. As leads are pursued, the investigation widens. Secondary characters become relevant in unexpected ways. Certain individuals who seem peripheral at first begin to matter more. The film is careful about misdirection, but it doesn't rely on cheap twists. Instead, it builds a web of connections that feel plausible within the world it's created. There's a strong emphasis on systems, how law enforcement operates, how media reacts, how communities absorb fear. None of this is presented with heavy-handed commentary. It's observational. You see press conferences, internal briefings, public speculation, the machinery of response turning in real time. And within that machinery, Steele finds himself navigating not just the criminal's moves, but institutional pressure. Deadlines, public scrutiny, internal doubt. The plot doesn't isolate him as a lone wolf disconnected from structure. He's very much part of a system, and that system both supports and constrains him. The pacing is deliberate. Information accumulates rather than explodes. Revelations feel earned because they're built from groundwork laid earlier. If you're expecting relentless adrenaline, this isn't that kind of ride. It's more controlled, more about sustained tension than sudden shock. One of the most compelling elements of the plot is the evolving relationship between Steele and his investigative partner. Their collaboration deepens as the case grows more complicated. Differences in approach initially create friction, but over time, mutual respect strengthens their effectiveness. That evolution adds emotional texture without distracting from the central mystery. Thematically, the film explores perception, what we notice, what we miss, how easily assumptions become blind spots. The antagonist exploits those blind spots, forcing Steele to re-examine his methods. The investigation becomes as much about introspection as it is about pursuit. By the midpoint, the narrative has established a psychological duel. The stakes are high, but not in a bombastic sense. They're high because failure would mean allowing a mind like this to continue operating unchecked. The tension comes from intelligence colliding with intelligence. As the story approaches its final stretch, threads begin tightening. Earlier details gain new relevance, patterns sharpen into clarity, and the confrontation that eventually arrives isn't about spectacle. It's about confrontation of ideology and will. Without giving anything away, the resolution honors the tone the film sets from the beginning. It avoids sensationalism. It stays grounded. Consequences feel real. Victory, if you want to call it that, carries weight. Ultimately, Crime 101 is less about a single case and more about what happens when two disciplined minds decide to test each other. It's about how systems respond to disruption, about how professionals maintain integrity under pressure, about how easily obsession can masquerade as dedication. And if you walk into it expecting explosions and grand theatrics, you might miss what it's actually doing. But if you're open to a measured, intelligent crime story that values atmosphere, character, and psychological tension, there's a lot to engage with here. It's a film that trusts patience, it trusts nuance, and it trusts the audience to connect dots rather than having them circled in red. That trust the film places in the audience is really where my overall feelings about Crime 101 start to crystallize, because this is the kind of movie that can either completely pull you in or quietly lose you depending on what you're expecting walking into it. Let me be straight with you. This isn't a crowd-pleasing, fist-pumping thriller. It's not engineered for applause moments. There are no slow-motion hero shots designed for trailer replay value. What it offers instead is something slower, more introspective, and frankly more demanding. And personally, I respect that. The first thing that struck me on a technical level was the control. The direction never feels indulgent. Every shot has purpose. The framing often isolates characters within negative space. Hallways that feel too long, rooms that feel too empty, visually reinforcing the emotional distance and psychological pressure at play. There's a compositional discipline that mirrors the story's intellectual restraint. The cinematography leans heavily into practical lighting. Streetlights flare naturally. Office fluorescents are harsh without becoming stylized. Night scenes don't glow unrealistically. They feel cold and textured. That grounded visual identity matters because it prevents the story from drifting into exaggerated noir territory. It keeps everything tethered to realism. The editing rhythm deserves attention too. There's patience in how scenes are allowed to breathe. Conversations don't cut away the moment a line is delivered. The camera often lingers just long enough to catch a reaction forming. That extra half-second makes a difference. It lets you read the thought process behind the dialogue. Now here's where it might divide audiences: the pacing. If you're conditioned to expect constant escalation, this film may feel slow in its first half. It builds deliberately. It accumulates tension rather than spiking it. But I'd argue that the deliberate pace is the point. The investigation feels procedural in the truest sense, methodical, sometimes frustrating, occasionally stagnant. That authenticity strengthens the payoff later. What impressed me most was how the film avoids moral simplification. There's no grand speech about justice, no sweeping declaration that wraps everything neatly. Instead, it leans into ambiguity. The antagonist's ideology is presented without endorsement, but also without cartoonish distortion. That balance requires confidence in both writing and performance. Speaking of writing, the screenplay is smart without being showy. It doesn't overload dialogue with exposition. Characters rarely state exactly what they're thinking. Subtext carries weight. There are moments where silence communicates more than paragraphs could. That kind of restraint is refreshing in an era where over-explanation has become common. Performance-wise, this is a character-driven success. Ethan Hawke anchors the film with a portrayal that feels lived in rather than performed. He resists dramatic flourishes. Even in confrontational scenes, he keeps his voice measured. That choice makes the rare flashes of emotion hit harder. Gemma Chan adds essential balance. Her presence prevents the narrative from becoming a one-man psychological spiral. She brings steadiness without stiffness, and her character's analytical clarity provides a counterweight to Steele's increasingly personal investment. And then there's Oscar Isaac, whose portrayal of the antagonist is unsettling precisely because it's calm. He doesn't telegraph menace. He doesn't choose scenery. He speaks like someone explaining a theory, which makes his perspective all the more disturbing. That choice elevates the psychological tension significantly. One area where I think the film could challenge some viewers is emotional accessibility. It doesn't spoon-feed empathy. It doesn't manipulate you into tears or triumph. If you're looking for catharsis, you may find the ending more contemplative than satisfying. But I'd argue that's consistent with the story it's telling. This isn't about the thrill of capture. It's about the cost of pursuit. And that cost lingers in subtle ways. Strained relationships, lingering doubt, quiet exhaustion. From a structural standpoint, the film holds together impressively well. Threads introduced early pay off later without feeling mechanical. There's a sense of cohesion that suggests careful scripting rather than last-minute patchwork. Even secondary characters feel purposeful rather than decorative. Now, does it reinvent the crime thriller genre? Not entirely. The bones of the story are familiar. Detective versus calculated criminal. But what distinguishes it is tone. It resists sensationalism. It prioritizes psychology over spectacle. In a landscape saturated with high-concept premises, there's something almost rebellious about a film that simply executes a classic framework with intelligence and discipline. I also appreciate that it doesn't romanticize obsession. Steele's dedication isn't framed as heroic in an uncomplicated way. The narrative acknowledges the strain it causes. That nuance adds maturity to the storytelling. On the flip side, viewers seeking explosive set pieces might feel underserved. The action is minimal and grounded. Even the climax favors dialogue and tension over chaos. Personally, I found that choice consistent with the film's identity, but it's worth noting. Sound design is another quiet strength. Instead of overwhelming the audience with aggressive scoring, the film uses silence strategically. Ambient noise, traffic hum, distant sirens, the buzz of fluorescent lights becomes part of the atmosphere. When the score does enter, it's subtle and textural rather than melodramatic. By the time the credits roll, what you're left with isn't adrenaline, it's contemplation. You think about the characters, about the choices they made, about how easily systems can be manipulated by someone patient enough to understand them. And that lingering reflection is, in my opinion, the film's greatest achievement. So where do I land overall? I think Crime 101 is a smart, restrained, adult crime thriller that rewards patience and attention. It's not flashy. It's not engineered for viral moments. It's carefully constructed and confidently performed. It may not be for everyone, and that's okay. But for viewers who appreciate psychological tension, grounded storytelling, and performances that trust subtlety over spectacle, there's real substance here. It doesn't shout for attention. It earns it quietly. What makes a film like Crime 101 especially rewarding on a second viewing is how much is happening just beneath the surface. The first time through, you're focused on the mechanics of the investigation, the clues, the tension, the psychological duel. But when you go back, knowing where it's headed, you start noticing the craftsmanship in a different way. One of the most fascinating details is how early the film visually telegraphs its themes without announcing them. There's a recurring motif of reflections, glass windows, rear-view mirrors, polished conference tables. Characters are often framed through something rather than directly. That isn't accidental. It reinforces the idea of perception versus reality, of seeing but not fully understanding. Steele spends the entire film trying to interpret what's in front of him, and visually, he's constantly surrounded by distortions. Pay attention to the blocking and interrogation scenes. The physical distance between characters subtly shifts depending on who holds psychological control. Early on, Steele often leans forward aggressively. Later, when he realizes he's being studied as much as he's studying, his posture becomes more reserved. It's a small adjustment in body language, but it tracks his internal evolution. There's also a subtle color progression throughout the film. The early sequences lean slightly cooler, more steel blues and grays. As the narrative intensifies, warmer tones begin creeping into certain scenes, especially during moments of confrontation. It's not dramatic enough to feel stylized, but it's deliberate. That warmth doesn't signal comfort, it signals pressure, heat building under the surface. Another detail that stood out involves sound. In multiple scenes where Steele is alone reviewing evidence, there's a faint ambient hum layered into the background. It's barely noticeable at first, but once you catch it, you realize it's present whenever he's deep in thought. It creates a subconscious tension, almost like a low-frequency anxiety that never fully resolves. The sound design team clearly understood how to manipulate atmosphere without being obvious. The title itself carries layered meaning beyond the obvious. On one level, it suggests fundamentals, crime basics, almost like an introductory course. But the film quietly flips that idea. The antagonist isn't teaching crime in a literal sense. He's exposing weaknesses in systems, demonstrating how predictability can be weaponized. In that way, 101 becomes ironic. What appears simple on the surface is anything but. If you look closely at the set design in Steele's home, you'll notice something subtle. Early in the film, family photos are prominently displayed in shared spaces, living room shelves, hallway walls. As the case consumes more of his attention, the framing shifts. Domestic scenes are shot from angles where those photos are partially obscured or blurred in the background. The environment hasn't changed, but the visual emphasis has. It's a quiet way of showing emotional distance without altering dialogue. There's also an interesting symmetry between the opening and closing shots. The film begins with the city at dusk, lights flickering on, activity winding down. It ends at dawn, the city waking up. That reversal isn't just aesthetic. It suggests continuity. Crime doesn't end. Systems reset. People carry forward. The cycle continues. In terms of performance nuance, watch how Oscar Isaac handles eye contact in his scenes. Early appearances are fleeting, glances that don't linger. When the character fully steps into frame later, he holds eye contact almost uncomfortably long. That shift subtly communicates control. It's a predator-prey dynamic conveyed through stillness rather than aggression. Similarly, Gemma Chan layers her performance with micro-reactions that reward close attention. There's a moment during a departmental briefing where she registers doubt about a theory being presented. She doesn't interrupt, she doesn't object, but her expression tightens almost imperceptibly. Later developments validate that hesitation. It's planted early, paid off later. A small but satisfying continuity detail. The film also avoids the typical info dump scene where everything is explained neatly. Even during the climactic confrontation, Exposition is minimal. Instead of laying out a detailed manifesto, the antagonist speaks in fragments, enough to understand motivation, but not enough to simplify it. That restraint keeps the character human rather than mythic. A subtle production detail worth noting: many exterior night scenes were shot practically rather than on sound stages. You can tell by the texture of the lighting and the natural movement in the background. Passing traffic, unpredictable reflections, environmental noise. That authenticity grounds the film in reality and enhances immersion. Another hidden layer involves pacing symmetry. The first half of the film uses longer takes and slower cuts. As the investigation narrows, edits become slightly tighter, not frantic, but incrementally quicker. It mirrors Steele's mental acceleration. You may not consciously register it, but your pulse does. And here's something I appreciated on a narrative level. There are no convenient technological miracles. Surveillance footage doesn't magically enhance beyond plausibility. Databases aren't cracked in seconds. The investigative process respects real-world limitations. That choice reinforces tension, because breakthroughs feel earned rather than gifted by plot convenience. Even minor props carry meaning. The recurring notebook Steele uses isn't flashy. It's worn, practical. By the end, its pages are visibly more chaotic, scribbles layered over earlier notes. It visually tracks his escalating fixation. What I admire most is how the film trusts visual storytelling over verbal explanation. It doesn't underline its themes. It embeds them in framing, performance, sound, and rhythm. Those details don't shout for recognition, but they're there for viewers willing to look. And that's why this movie benefits from rewatching. The first viewing hooks you with tension. The second reveals craftsmanship. The third might even shift your sympathies slightly, not in terms of morality, but in understanding. You start noticing how both central figures operate under rigid belief systems. Different values, same discipline. That mirroring is intentional. Ultimately, the hidden details in Crime 101 reinforce its central idea. Everything is about observation. What you see, what you miss, what you assume. And fittingly, the film rewards viewers who practice the very skill its protagonist relies on: careful attention. And here's the interesting part. Because on the surface, Crime 101 doesn't look like what we traditionally label a blockbuster. It doesn't have capes. It doesn't have IP recognition stretching back decades. It isn't engineered around spectacle-heavy trailers or viral catchphrases. But if you really study the landscape right now, you start to see why a film like this absolutely has the potential to break out in a big way. First, there's audience fatigue. For the last several years, theatrical releases have leaned heavily into franchise filmmaking. Massive universes, connected timelines, end credit teases. And while that model still works financially, there's an undeniable appetite building for something grounded, something self-contained. When viewers walk into Crime 101, they're not being asked to remember 10 prior installments or wait for a sequel setup. It's a complete experience. That's refreshing. Second, adult audiences have been underserved in theaters. There's a huge demographic that wants intelligent, mature storytelling. Not necessarily art house, not necessarily niche. Just well-made films that treat viewers like grown adults. When those films hit the right nerve, they sustain. They don't always explode opening weekend, but they hold. Word of mouth becomes the engine, and this kind of thriller thrives on recommendation. It's the sort of movie someone watches on a Friday night and then texts 3 friends. You need to see this. Not because it's loud, but because it lingers, because it sparks conversation. That kind of organic momentum can quietly build serious numbers over time. There's also the casting factor. Ethan Hawke carries credibility across multiple generations of viewers. He's respected. Audiences trust him in morally layered roles. Gemma Chan appeals to both mainstream and prestige crowds, bridging demographic gaps. And Oscar Isaac brings that rare combination of critical respect and broad recognition. That trio alone draws attention. But beyond star power, there's rewatch value, and that's critical. Blockbusters aren't just about spectacle anymore. They're about repeat engagement. Viewers who feel like they missed subtle clues on the first pass often return. Especially with a thriller built on layered details, audiences like testing themselves, catching things they didn't notice before. That kind of engagement translates to longevity. The film also occupies a strategic middle ground in tone. It's serious, but not inaccessible. Thoughtful, but not abstract. Tense, but not gratuitously violent. That balance widens its appeal. It can satisfy viewers looking for depth without alienating those who simply want a gripping story. Another factor working in its favor is the theatrical experience itself. The controlled pacing, the deliberate sound design, the silence between lines. Those elements land differently in a cinema. In a packed auditorium, tension becomes communal. You feel the collective stillness during interrogation scenes. You sense the shared anticipation during reveals. That kind of atmosphere enhances the experience beyond what streaming at home can replicate. And in an era where studios are recalibrating what qualifies as event cinema, something different can become the event. There's also critical credibility. Films that receive strong reviews for intelligence and craft often attract audiences who might otherwise wait for streaming. Prestige sells, not in the flashy way marketing departments hype, but in the quiet assurance that your ticket purchase won't feel wasted. Financially, mid-budget thrillers can be extremely profitable if they perform steadily. They don't need billion-dollar returns to succeed. Lower overhead means sustainable gains. If a film like this builds momentum internationally, especially in markets that appreciate grounded crime dramas, it can quietly accumulate impressive numbers. And let's not overlook award season conversation. Even modest nominations can extend theatrical runs. When a film stays in public discourse longer, it stays visible. Visibility equals tickets. There's another subtle reason this could break out. It feels contemporary without being topical in a heavy-handed way. Audiences today are more media literate. They appreciate nuance. A film that respects that intelligence can resonate more deeply than one that over-explains. Plus, the absence of franchise baggage makes it accessible. New viewers don't feel intimidated. There's no barrier to entry. Sometimes a blockbuster isn't about spectacle, it's about saturation. Being talked about, being debated, being recommended, being dissected. Crime 101 has that quality. It's the kind of film people argue about afterward. Some may find it too restrained. Others will praise its discipline. But either way, they're talking. And conversation sustains cultural footprint. If it performs well enough to justify future collaborations between this creative team, it could also signal to studios that intelligent, mid-budget thrillers still deserve theatrical space. That ripple effect matters beyond one film's revenue. Ultimately, whether it reaches blockbuster status in the traditional sense or not, it has the ingredients to overperform expectations. Strong performances, layered storytelling, rewatch value, and cross-demographic appeal. And sometimes, the movies that don't scream the loudest end up lasting the longest. Now let's zoom out for a second. Because sometimes when we talk about a movie's success, we limit the conversation to box office numbers, opening weekend, domestic totals, international gross. But cultural impact? That's a different metric entirely. And honestly, it's the one that lasts. If Crime 101 lands the way it has the potential to, it won't just be remembered as that solid thriller from 2026. It could quietly influence what gets greenlit next. We've seen this pattern before. When adult-driven crime dramas hit unexpectedly, Hollywood notices. Studios start asking different questions in development meetings. Instead of, what IP can we reboot? The conversation becomes, what smart, contained story can we execute with precision? And that shift matters. Right now, audiences are hyper-aware of formula. They can sense when a script is reverse-engineered for global markets. They can feel when characters exist to serve spectacle instead of story. If this film proves that meticulous storytelling still has commercial viability, it reinforces trust between studios and audiences. And let's talk about representation for a moment. Not in a forced, performative way, but in a natural evolution sense. When you have performers like Gemma Chan leading a grounded crime narrative, it normalizes diverse casting in prestige genres without turning it into the headline. That's progress through presence, not press release. It also continues the long arc of actors like Ethan Hawke and Oscar Isaac choosing projects that challenge rather than coast. When established actors back intelligent scripts, it signals to younger talent that career longevity isn't built on noise, it's built on taste. And audiences respond to taste. There's something culturally reassuring about a film that trusts silence, that trusts performance, that doesn't undercut tension with constant music cues or rapid editing. It reminds viewers of a different rhythm of storytelling, one that existed before algorithmic pacing became standard. If this film resonates, you might see more directors given room to breathe creatively, more scripts that value restraint over exposition, more marketing campaigns that lean into atmosphere instead of plot spoilers. Another ripple effect is audience expectation recalibration. When viewers experience a thriller that refuses to spoon-feed answers, they start demanding more from future releases. They become more patient with ambiguity. They engage more actively. That's how collective taste evolves. There's also the streaming conversation. If a mid-budget theatrical thriller performs strongly, it challenges the assumption that this type of movie belongs on streaming. It reaffirms that adult audiences will leave their homes for something compelling. That message carries weight in boardrooms. And culturally, crime stories have always mirrored societal anxieties: power, corruption, morality, accountability. Without being overtly political, films like this often spark broader discussions about ethics and justice. When those conversations extend beyond the theater, the movie becomes part of a larger dialogue. That's longevity. You start seeing think pieces. Podcasts dissect character motivations. YouTube essays break down thematic layers. That ecosystem of analysis keeps a film alive in the public consciousness long after its theatrical run ends. And let's be honest, in the social media era, a movie doesn't just live in cinemas. It lives in discourse. Memorable lines become captions. Subtle scenes become GIFs. Even debates over ambiguous endings become trending topics. That's how cult status begins. Not through marketing blitzes, but through sustained curiosity. If Crime 101 achieves that, it won't just be financially successful, it'll be influential. It'll represent a reminder that Hollywood doesn't have to choose between art and commerce. It can do both. And maybe, just maybe, we look back a few years from now and say this was one of those quiet pivot points. The moment where studios realized audiences weren't asking for louder movies, they were asking for smarter ones. That's a powerful ripple. Because cultural impact isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in what comes next. Alright, so after breaking down the performances, the atmosphere, the industry positioning, the potential box office angle, and the cultural ripple effect, let's bring this home. Because at the end of the day, none of that matters if the movie doesn't work. And here's the thing. Crime 101 works because it understands restraint. It doesn't scream for your attention. It earns it. The tension isn't manufactured through chaos. It's built through patience. The characters aren't exaggerated. They're layered. The conflict isn't about spectacle. It's about psychology. And that distinction is important in 2026, where so much theatrical content is designed to overwhelm rather than engage. Watching performances from actors like Ethan Hawke, Gemma Chan, and Oscar Isaac in a contained, morally complex crime narrative feels refreshing. There's a maturity in the storytelling that respects the audience's intelligence. This is not a turn-your-brain-off thriller. It's a lean-forward and pay-attention thriller, and those are rarer than they should be. Now, is it perfect? Probably not. Some viewers may find the pacing deliberate to the point of slow. Others might crave a more explosive third act. But honestly, those critiques stem from expectation, not execution. The film commits to its tone, and it doesn't compromise for broader appeal. That artistic consistency deserves respect. From a reviewer's standpoint, this is the kind of movie I want studios to keep making. Mid-budget, actor-driven, thematically rich, theatrically worthy. If it succeeds financially, it could encourage more intelligent crime dramas in the mainstream pipeline. If it doesn't, it'll still stand as a reminder that there's an audience hungry for grounded storytelling. And here's my honest verdict. If you're someone who loves character studies wrapped in tension, if you appreciate films that let silence speak louder than explosions, if you miss the era where crime thrillers trusted performances over CGI, then this is absolutely worth your time in theaters. This isn't about hype, it's about craft. And craft ages well. Now let me throw it to you. Do you think audiences are ready to embrace smart, restrained thrillers again? Or are we still in an era where spectacle dominates attention spans? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to hear where you stand on this. And if you're building your watch list for 2026, make sure this one is on it. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button. It genuinely helps the channel more than you think. Subscribe if you're serious about thoughtful, no-fluff Hollywood analysis. And turn on notifications so you don't miss the next breakdown. Because we're not just reviewing movies here. We're dissecting where the industry is heading. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and I'll see you at the movies.